Hello, people. Welcome back to Story, Crime, and Wine. Today is one story from one person, and when you hear it, you're going to think, wow, how did I not hear this in the media? It's something that I can never even imagine going through myself. If you like what you hear today, go ahead and subscribe and like and hit that bell, because you never know when a post will strike when you need it most. Grab a glass of wine or water or whatever you need, and let's get started. This is the story of how I spent the last week or so and how I got involved in one of the craziest situations in my entire life. I've made lifelong friends, lifelong enemies, and it all takes place on my phone. I'm going to change the names of most people involved other than myself and another person, but I'll get there eventually. This will be long, and honestly, it really hasn't ended yet. The events are ongoing as of today, Friday, January 28th, 2022. I have screenshots of most of the things I'll be talking about, including conversations. So I'll start where my involvement began. It's Friday, January 21st, 2022. I'm just hanging out at home, playing GTA Online. I walk into my submarine to load into a Cayo Perico run. My system is last gen, so my load times are a little long. I had been reading the comments on a story about a missing man I first saw on my tiny little community's Facebook page. While waiting to load in, I pick up my phone and check on my breaking developments in the case. It was about a 27-year-old man named Joe. I click on the post made by his 26-year-old wife, Renee, and read. Joe had been gone for 50-plus days. Last seen on November 24th, 2021, getting onto Highway 99 North headed to Fresno. His co-worker stated Joe mentioned he was going to do some early Christmas shopping and head home. He had worked that day putting up solar panels in Dinuba, California, then had lunch with his co-worker at a burger spot in Goshen, about 20 miles south. He never made it home. There was a GoFundMe put up in December asking for help giving their 6 kids a nice Christmas, since Joe was the sole provider. $1,200 was raised. Renee wasn't getting much help from the detective or the Fresno Police Department in general. This didn't surprise me. FPD is hard. Their environment is hard. And while Fresno may not be the worst place on earth, anyone that's spent significant time there knows it's not pretty. At this point, I'm interested. So I'm reading through the comments. Most are encouraging and sympathetic. Typical Facebook stuff, but a few catch my attention. I am, admittedly, not the type of guy that just goes along with the narrative. I like to ask questions and hear others' opinions on how they see the situation, regardless of what the situation is. One guy, let's call him Mike, is saying a lot of stuff others aren't saying. It's like he has some inside information on what's going on. Apparently, the timeline of what happened had changed, and according to him, evidence and information were being withheld. There was another person commenting that got my attention. Ella seemed very interested in this as well, saying Renee gave her Chris Watts vibes. She was making some very outrageous statements, but people were eating it up and piling on. At this point, I was invested. Mike had made a very good point about the timeline. He explained that the first flyer Renee distributed had November 26th at a bar in Fresno's Tower District as his last known location. The most recent one, made by Joe's aunt, said November 24th and Christmas shopping. Obviously, this raised some eyebrows. He then said something like, Renee hasn't even said everything found in that car. And at this point, I'm all in. I ask a question I can't even remember on that comment. Not 5 minutes later, I received a direct message from Mike. What I read cements the deal. There's no turning back now. I begin having a conversation with Mike about the situation. He tells me about Joe and Renee's relationship a little and how Renee has been acting funny ever since Joe's disappearance. According to him, Joe is a baby-faced alcoholic, and the fact that he left his ID made no sense. He says Renee and her grandfather found Joe's car, but she had people out searching for it for another 2 weeks. He also tells me Joe's shoes, his wallet, and a slip of paper with a phone number on it were found inside. His cell phone was also found, and the SIM card had been removed and left in the car. Only the wallet and phone was known information, and people thought the SIM card was taken from the car. I was hooked. I had to verify this information somehow. That phone number is this case, I thought to myself. Around the same time, I reached out to Ella. Turns out, she runs a true crime Facebook group. She invites me to the group, and we begin throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. By this point, my sole focus in life was finding Joe. I needed everything I could get my hands on. I needed conversations about the situation. I needed facts. I needed details. This seemed like the place for that. Then, mudslinging started once the group looked into Renee's other social media accounts. Twitter? No mention of Joe. Instagram? Nothing before he went missing. One flyer after. It's like this guy didn't even exist until he disappeared. What the heck is going on? I go to sleep that night with Joe on my mind. I wake up and start my usual routine. I notice there are quite a few more notifications than usual on Facebook. There had been a lot of heated back and forth between Renee's friends and the group. I grab my coffee, sit down, and begin to read. I start asking questions about the bar in particular, among other inconsistencies. I also began slipping in hints that I know they found more in the car than what's being said. I try to make the point that the goal is to find Joe, not to convict Renee. Eventually, I start getting more DMs, from Ella, from Mike, and from someone I hadn't yet talked to. Her name will be Rachel. Rachel had been reading my comments and questions. She felt the same as me. We needed to find this man, and something is off with the wife. Also like me, Rachel wanted facts. They were very important to her, and I respected that. She wasn't into drama, and I saw no mudslinging coming from her. We began DMing back and forth, trying to figure out this jumbled mess of a case. I wanted to see this footage of Joe in the bar I was hearing about, to prove that was his last known location. Rachel agreed that we needed a timeline that was 100% accurate if we stood any chance of finding this man. It's been around 55 days at this point. It was not looking good. I also started talking to another random person we will call Ashley. She is into this kind of stuff, and her personal profile is dedicated to it. I respected that immediately. She was researching and writing about the Daniel Robinson disappearance, but this situation had caught her eye. I hadn't seen any mudslinging from Ashley either, so I trusted her as well. That night, we started a group chat together. Ashley, Rachel, and myself. We weren't sure Ella was in it for the right reasons, so we held off on inviting her to join us. This chat's sole purpose was to find Joe. Anything and everything would be discussed. Ella had been sensationalizing it all day. Then someone commented to her how Renee couldn't be too worried about finding Joe, being that she was cuddled up with her baby daddy. What? Was this true? I had to find out for myself. That's motive. Sleep did not come easy on this night. My mind was racing. I wake up on day 3 to a message from one of Renee's friends, Lucy. She had been commenting on Renee's behalf the day prior, and she wants to know why I'm talking like I know more about this than anyone else. At this point, I had several theories. Rachel, Ashley, and I had been racking our brains on this for the better part of the last 12 hours in our private chat. I tell her I know what they found in the car. I mention the shoes and the phone number, trying to get her to confirm its existence. Lucy comes right out and tells me, yes, Renee told me about that, and Renee called that number. I hadn't been talking about that phone number because it could not be proven. I had hinted at its existence as well as the other items found in the car, but never said what. She just confirmed it and gave me more information. I thanked her. I then sent a DM to the woman that made the claim about the baby daddy. Let's call her Mary. I asked point blank, is what you said about Renee true? She replied almost immediately, yes, and then began telling me how they had been seeing each other since before Joe disappeared and had already introduced their kids to each other. It was huge. Renee had denied seeing anyone since Joe disappeared, but this didn't prove Renee was lying. The screenshot Mary sent me next did. Her ex's phone with a text from Renee. His contact for her had 3 hearts next to it. She gives me permission to post our conversation, so I post everything to the group. It was like throwing chum into a school of starving sharks. It was a frenzy. The entire group chat began ripping into Danae like she was a bone-in ribeye steak. They wanted Renee arrested and questioned. My theory wasn't fully hashed out, but it was coming together. One of 2 things happened to Joe, in my opinion. He overdosed or he was killed. There had been talk that Joe used M, but nothing concrete. I needed more information about that number. Whose number was it? Mike had said it was a female's in one of our earlier conversations, and I believed him. He didn't lie about its existence. Why lie about the details? What was said on that call? Was she threatened? There was only one person that could answer those questions, Renee herself. So, I got myself together and wrote her a very heartfelt message. In it, I explained that I am not trying to ruin her life. I just want to help find her husband. If I had kids, they would be about Joe and Renee's age. I also know that area well, being a child of divorce and going from mother to father all of the time. Fresno was one of my homes and Tower District one of my hoods. I explained that her inconsistencies are making everyone believes she has something to do with this. Then I ask about that number. I ask if she called it. I asked if she was threatened. I tell her, if you called that number and they threatened you and your kids, then everything confusing about this gets a lot less confusing. I thank her for her time and press send. About 30 minutes later, I get a reply. Show me the screenshots. I send a screenshot of the conversation with Lucy that confirmed the existence of the number. Not that one, she says. I've seen that one. I tell her that I'm sorry, but I'm not willing to share that information with her. I had promised Mike that I wouldn't let anyone know he told me about it. She gets angry and tells me she won't talk to me if that's the case. I thank her for her time and promise not to post screenshots of our conversation. I then go back to Rachel and Ashley and tell them of what just happened. That conversation threw me for a loop. All Renee seemed to care about was exposing my source. To me, that meant all Renee cared about was Renee. I barely sleep that night. I'm in way over my head. What did you get yourself into, P? The next day started slow. I relayed what I'd learned to Ella. She ate it up. Rachel also informed me Renee had reached out to her. The group post was getting more attention than anything that group had ever posted. Ella seemed to love every second of it. Hundreds of comments, over 1,000 reactions. She had found the baby daddy, we'll call him Bob, and was blasting his info to the group. The tea, as she called it, was brewing. I was starting to question her motives, but was hyper-focused on what I felt was my job now, finding Joe. Rachel tells our private chat that Renee has asked her to smooth things over with the group. By the time the afternoon rolls in, the frenzy hadn't slowed down. I got to the point where Renee's grandfather joined to answer questions for his granddaughter. It was honestly one of the bravest things I've ever seen online. That group had turned into a lion's den, and Renee was the meal. Somehow he won the group over, and even Ella herself demanded that they show him respect. Around this time, Rachel began posting Renee's answers to the group's questions. There are now 2 threads going, Rachel and the original one doing all the mudslinging. It was then I started asking the grandfather the tough stuff in the original mudslinging thread. I asked about the bar on the 26th, and eventually he answers, yes, Joe was there. Nice, is there video? Yes. Okay, now we're getting somewhere, I think to myself. Then I throw the phone number at him. His answer hit me like a rock to the face. That's not something that should be talked about in public. My main theory at this point was Joe may have tried to bag the wrong guy's lady. Renee had more holes in her story than Swiss cheese, but Rachel had cleared a lot of that up in her post. Joe had problems. He's an alcoholic and he dabbles in M. He's known to take off for a few days at a time, as Renee doesn't allow M use in their home. She withheld that thinking FPD would take the case more seriously, but it had the opposite effect. They knew it wasn't true. They are impoverished, barely scraping by, and they live with their grandfather in a single wide mobile home. 3 grown adults and 6 kids. Sadly, this isn't uncommon in Fresno. She also tells how the timeline had gotten mixed up. Joe's aunt made the second flyer and put the last time Renee had contact with Joe on November 24th as his last known location, not mentioning he was on camera in Tower on the 26th. Adding to the confusion, a third flyer, made by Joe's immediate family, started making the rounds. It was a picture of Joe and a phone number with the word missing at the top. Renee had also been receiving obviously photoshopped ransom texts. They looked ridiculous, so nobody took them seriously. But Joe's sister had received what was considered a pretty credible threat from an unknown person. She talks about their relationship and how it has gotten physical on a few occasions. She also points out that Mary's baby dad, Bob, and herself had been close friends since high school, and he was related to one of her children, so of course the kids had already met. She spilled her guts to this group. While Rachel is clearing all this up, I send the grandfather a DM. Maybe we can talk about that number privately. I begin very respectfully, apologizing for not taking his granddaughter's feelings into account in my findings. He obviously is not happy with me, but the conversation is very cordial and respectful. He won't talk about that number though, so I ask him if I can bluntly tell him what I think happened to Joe. He agrees. I tell him I believe the husband of the woman on the number may have disappeared Joe. He immediately responds, Renee is willing to tell you everything. Can I send you her phone number? I'm shocked. I tell him I will talk to her, but I will not tell her how I know what I know. Protecting my source was very, very important to me. She agrees. I tell him to shoot it, and he sends me her number. As I'm clicking it, I think twice about using my actual phone number to talk to somebody that might very well be involved in a homicide. So instead, I call her on Facebook Messenger. She already knew my name, she hates me, and I'm her number one enemy. She answers immediately. 3.5 hours later, I have all the answers. Remembering that call is tough. Not only was it long, it was all over the place. So I grabbed my trusty pen and began taking notes. She tells me about the bar and sends the footage she has. She tells me about the car and sends pictures of everything found inside. She says, Joe insisted on being paid cash instead of Venmo. Then she drops a bomb. Joe had been gone 5 days the week prior. He couldn't access the Venmo. That went straight to her bank account. He wanted that cash money. Renee was used to Joe taking off up to 2 or 3 times a year. She called them benders, but 5 days was the longest he had ever been gone before now. Nobody knows this except close personal friends. And keep in mind, we are going on 58 days at this point. According to Renee, when he came home on November 22nd from that 5-day bender, he was messed up and showing signs of heavy M use. Apparently, on November 18th, 2021, he met a man, let's call him Chris, at a park in the middle of the night. The party ends 4 days later, and Joe just shows up back home. His mind is fried. It takes days for him to get close to normal again. Imagine being up for 4 days, drunk out of your mind. I can't speak from personal experience, as I've never touched M and refuse to even consider it. But I have seen the effects of long-term M use firsthand. She says he seemed to finally be getting back to normal when he left for work on the morning of the 24th. Renee also explains that Bob, Mary's baby daddy, is one of her son's cousins. She says, yes, he may want me, but he's not my type. She was right. Renee liked skinny Mexican gangbangers. That was not how I would describe Bob at all. Sure enough, as the pictures rolled in, every man she had ever been with was pretty much a clone of the other. When you have a type, you have a type. She also points out she has no control over Bob's feelings or how Bob decides to save her number on his phone. She is right, and I did consider that. There were 2 contacts showing in the screenshot Mary sent. Renee on top with 3 hearts, and another female with 2 hearts. I don't know the significance, but it does seem fishy. Regardless, I had no proof her and Bob were an item, and Mary seemed to be trying to lead me down a road she wanted me to go. Not outright lying, but not being completely honest either. Baby mama drama. She tells me that FPD located the car on November 30th, yet didn't inform her of it until December 2nd. Renee cannot explain why. When told, she's given a vague location. Do you know anyone on San Pablo? Upon hearing this, Renee and her grandfather start to look. Renee calls her aunt to come pick her up. Then they start on one side of San Pablo, her grandfather the other. The area isn't extremely large, and her grandfather locates the vehicle. He calls Renee and tells her where the car is. When she arrives, he goes to the house the car is parked in front of and asks the residents how long the vehicle has been there. He's told it showed up on the evening of the 26th. Renee contacts FPD and awaits their arrival. When FPD arrives, the officer attempts to open the door handle of the car with his baton. It's locked. Renee then asks the responding officer if he was going to fingerprint the car. He says, no, there is no evidence of foul play. Renee then calls a tow truck and waits approximately 4 to 5 hours for it to arrive. She can't explain why. They load up Joe's car and take it back to their house. Once home, Renee begins to search its contents. A pair of Joe's shoes were found on the floorboard. There looked to be blood on the laces. In the picture, the knot was clean, leading me to believe it was already there when tied. Besides, he wasn't wearing those shoes. He had another pair in the trunk. She discovers his tool bag is missing as well, probably stolen or sold. Renee then checks the center console and finds a receipt from the bar and Joe's phone. The phone was turned off. Renee turns it on and it reads no SIM. Renee's aunt remarks, weird, these phones don't have a SIM? So Renee removes the case to show her where it goes. When she does this, a slip of paper with a phone number on it falls from the case. The SIM card is tucked inside the folded paper. Renee dials the number on her phone and a woman answers. The conversation is heated and Renee is understandably flustered. She is hung up on mid-sentence. Renee then begins to tell me about Cindy, the name on the slip of paper with the phone number on it. She tells me Cindy is Chris's older sister and she's trouble. From what she has put together from talking to them both, after work on November 24th, Joe met up with Chris and Chris introduces him to Cindy. They party through Thanksgiving, and on the morning of the 26th, Cindy and Chris begin arguing. It's unknown why. This prompts Joe to leave. In subsequent conversations with both Chris and Cindy, they tell Renee they haven't talked to Joe since that morning, the 26th. Renee calls Cindy again a few days later, and Cindy tells her, "It's not going to end good. You should get the cops involved." After this conversation, Cindy stops taking Renee's calls. We talk and talk and talk. Her situation is very familiar. It's typical Fresno. She was not a murderer. She was just a naive kid making mistakes, trying to save herself and Joe from embarrassment. I tell her that's a big reason why FPD didn't take this seriously and how it's turned this group against her. She agrees, but the damage has already been done. We decide at this time to start a Facebook group dedicated to finding Joe. Rachel, Renee, and myself will be the administrators. I thank her for speaking with me and agree to help. I return to the private chat with Ashley and Rachel. I begin to tell them what I know now and how I do not believe Renee is involved anymore. Ashley is put in charge of making a new, accurate flyer to post to the new group. Ashley is a character, and her attention to detail and hyper-focus came in very handy. She had transcribed a phone call that Joe's aunt had with Cindy. It's illegal to record people without their consent in California, but at this point, I think that was the least of Renee's worries. I'll just say it was interesting. Joe's aunt is trying to get Cindy to repeat the things she said in her last conversation with Renee. She won't, but slips and says they put him somewhere after Bobby's, the bar he was last seen leaving. She also speaks about the receipt. I'm not convinced she did anything, but she knows more than she's saying. She freaks out when told her brother Chris was seen coming out of that house. Cindy actually mutes the phone to talk to her mother without being heard. It was a bluff. There was no proof that Chris was ever in that house, but her reaction told a story. She gets aggressive and ends the conversation. I was 90% sure that Joe had overdosed in the house his car was parked in front of. Rachel, after talking to Renee herself, agrees with me. Renee had no guidance, was given terrible advice, and made poor choices, but she was no murderer. Rachel and I had kept our opening conversation going this whole time. It was our personal conversation, about our lives, our views, our passions. She trusts me completely, and I trust her just as much. It's a brother-sister connection, and while our main focus was finding Joe, she would throw a barb at me here and there for a much-needed tension breaker. She's a great lady. Nothing left that chat. It was sacred. I appreciated those ladies then, and I still do today. I began to write a retraction to the Mary post. That information was invalidated, and it was irresponsible of me to post it without getting it 100% confirmed. It's a mistake I regret, and I am still paying for it today. That true crime group, and Ella in particular, was thirsty for some tea. The sharks were starving. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. I better try to get some sleep. My morning routine had changed. Coffee was still the first order of business, but writing became just as important. I put the finishing touches on the Mary retraction. It looked great, so I sent it to Renee. We had been communicating a lot and had grown to trust each other completely. I became her mouthpiece, I guess you could say. She would call me her whack-ass detective and trusted me with the most intimate details of her life and this case. I felt obligated at this point to do anything I could to help her because I felt that I personally damaged her search with the Mary stuff. She wanted me to tell the story of Joe's disappearance on her new page. She really is a sweet girl. She's hood as heck, but she's genuine. She was putting the finishing touches on the new page, Finding Joe. I also sent the Mary post to the private chat with Rachel and Ashley. I sent everything to that chat. We were a team. Ashley herself is a writer, so I definitely respect her thoughts. She had been busy working on Daniel's case, but said she was close to finishing the flyer. She just needed the specifics: height, weight, tattoos, etc. The post was deemed acceptable, so I prepared to post it. But first, I needed to talk to Ella. I sent Ella a DM. She responds quickly. I began to tell her about the page Renee was making. She seemed supportive, but was still taking jabs at Renee. I didn't like that. I then shared a screenshot with her. It was a conversation Renee and Rachel had. In it, Renee tells Rachel that police are taking her phone. I did this to show Ella this was serious. It had the opposite effect. Ella seemed excited. What? My group has that kind of power? I immediately regretted sharing that with her. Rachel had sent that screenshot with complete confidence I would not share it with anybody, and I did. I didn't even realize what I had done at the time. Ella's reaction made me feel like my posts may put an innocent woman behind bars. An innocent woman with 6 kids. That is something I could not live with. I knew right then we made the right decision leaving her out of our group. I tell Ella I'm going to post the Mary retraction, and she says, okay. It's one of the last DMs between us. I post the Mary retraction and wait for the responses. Honestly, it was positive. The group listened to what I had to say, and most of them accepted my apology. Thank goodness. I really expected to be the next meal. There were a few holdouts, but Ella was not one of them. That helped, as she was the ringleader. As the days goes on, Ella's group remained calm. Their interest was still high, but it was focused on something positive, helping Renee find her husband. They even started posting other threads about other cases, but nothing got the attention the posts about Joe did. With all that behind me, it was time to get balls deep in the video footage Renee sent me. It's going to be a long day, it seems. Joe had been gone 59 days at this point. A happy ending did not seem to be in the cards. We needed to get to work. The footage is from inside the establishment. Bobby Salazar's taqueria and bar in Fresno's Tower District. I had shared the video with both Rachel and Ashley in our private chat as soon as I got it from Renee the day prior. So we began to dissect it together. The 35-second clip told a story. We just had to find it. I must have watched it over 50 times myself. I'm not sure. Eventually, I noticed something strange. You see Joe at the bar, presumably ordering a drink. He is alone and looks to be a bit drunk. A group of 4 unknown individuals, 3 male, 1 female, are to his right. You can see the group react to something Joe may have said to them, and they all turn to look at him. The female even points directly at him. One of the males begins to approach Joe. It looked to me that he was getting ready to sucker punch him, but a man in a black baseball cap steps in between, literally chest to chest with the first man, and backs him into a corner. He seems to make a hand motion you'd make to tell someone to chill or maybe even wait. Joe begins dancing at the counter where he ordered his drink alone. The video ends with the 2 men in the corner, mad dogging a hole in the back of Joe's head, while Joe danced without a care in the world. A second video shows Joe leave the establishment. Nobody is with him. A man turns like he recognized Joe, then turns away. About 3 seconds later, he turns to look at Joe again. Joe then begins to pull his Raiders windbreaker off, to turn it from being inside out, not looking back at all. The dress code at Bobby's doesn't allow sports teams or sweats after 10 p.m. Joe was wearing both. It's the last time he was seen on video. I ask Rachel and Ashley to focus on the group behind Joe. They agree, that's something to look at. Ashley begins taking screenshots of the video, breaking it down almost frame by frame. We throw theories back and forth, trying to figure out some identifying features of the group behind Joe. Had anyone talked to these people? They should be interviewed by police at the very least. One thing we all agreed on, Joe was getting a ton of attention, and I remark, he was never going to make it out of this night alive. It felt like watching a dead man walking. It seemed nothing would save him from his fate. While all of this was happening in our private chat, Ella's true crime group had calmed way down. It seemed they accepted the mistakes that were made, and were still being supportive of Renee in her search for Joe. Renee and Ella even started communicating cordially. Still, I was positive Ella was in this for the wrong reasons, and my partners, Ashley and Rachel, agreed. We would not be inviting her to our private chat, or the new group Renee was starting. All the information we had would be going to Renee's new page. This may have been a mistake. Ella was waiting for updates like her group was more important than actually finding Joe. Renee finished creating the new group page dedicated to finding Joe. I began writing the first post. It's going to tell the story of Joe at Bobby Salazar's. As soon as finding Joe goes up, Renee invites me and makes me an admin. I then invite Rachel and make her an admin. Ashley is invited and made an expert, as well as Renee's best friend. She doesn't play a part in this, so she will remain nameless. I send the first post to Renee and my team. They look it over and give me the okay to post it, so I do. This is already long enough, so no need to recap what happened at Bobby's. I told the story and posted the screenshot Ashley had provided for a visual reference. Renee did not want me to post the whole video. She said, "It's embarrassing." I tried to explain that's not what's important right now, but it didn't matter in the end. Ashley's screenshots told the story just fine. Rachel is put in charge of writing the rules of the page, and these rules would be strictly enforced. We could not have this group turn into a place to sling mud. It's counterproductive. While Rachel is doing that, Ashley asks, why isn't Joe on the missing persons directory? That was a good question. I admit, I hadn't even looked. I was so focused on other things, I just assumed he was. I look on Name Us, and sure enough, Joe is not on the list. I ask Renee why Joe isn't listed on Name Us. She tells us she reported him missing and just figured he was on the list. She says, I even filled out all those papers and everything. This was strange. I didn't think she was lying to me though. By this time, our bond had grown tremendously. We had been communicating almost non-stop since our initial 3-hour phone conversation. I told her that her goal for today was getting Joe on that list. Or at the very least, finding out why he isn't on it. Finding Joe was growing fast. People were joining, asking questions, and giving support. Anything I couldn't answer myself, I tagged Renee so she could. It was all positive, and everyone seemed invested in this case. As the day turned to night, our private chat was in high spirits. Ashley, Rachel, and I had grown close. There's a bond forming, and we begin to consider forming our own group when this is all said and done. The Truth Sleuths were born. I start planning my next post. In it, I plan to cover Renee finding the car. This was a point of much confusion, thanks to me in part, and that phone number specifically. I write a rough draft before bed. My eyes were burning by this point. The new flyer will be ready tomorrow, and my next post is the one everybody is waiting for. I fall asleep on day 59 feeling that we are close to figuring this whole thing out. The reins of Castamere begin to play. I slept till my alarm, I thought to myself. It's 6 a.m. on day 60 of Joe being gone. Sleep and food had become less important by now. It felt like we were close to finishing this thing up. While I waited for my coffee to brew, I began proofreading my next post. If you got this far, it's obviously I'm not a professional, but I want everything to look as legitimate as possible. I send the post to Renee and she says it's fine, so I hit send. I had edited that phone number so nobody could see much other than it existed, leaving only the area code and the first letter of the name on top, C. I posted that picture as well as photos of the car and the shoes. I also told the story of how the car was found. No need to recap, we've already been there. It was around this time Ashley finished the new flyer. Renee replayed the information Ashley needed to me, and I posted it to the private chat. Ashley sends the flyer to our private chat, and I send it to Renee to post everywhere. It was a perfect flyer. Every detail was there. She did a great job. I cannot stress that enough. Ella's group was getting restless. All of the updates were going to Finding Joe, not the true crime group. I had stopped posting to Ella's page when I started working with Renee, and her traffic was slowing way down. Again, they started getting toxic, almost demanding we post to her group first before even putting our posts onto Finding Joe. This did not seem like a true crime group to me anymore. Rachel and Ashley agreed. At the time, we were so busy we didn't even notice it getting so bad. Anything sent to me other than information on Joe, I ignored completely. Another mistake on my part. I never said my hands were clean in this. I'm just a guy that drives a tractor. I really had no business getting involved, but that's a mistake I'd make again every single time. This day had already been long, and it wasn't even close to being over. It was turning back into Renee versus Ella. The tea is definitely brewing. Renee posts the flyer to Finding Joe, and also to her personal page. Not 10 minutes later, a woman that works at a shop in Tower commented on Renee's personal page. That guy just walked right by my shop. Renee calls me immediately, and I tell her, "Go, go, go!" People from the area that were following the post began offering to go look. Many of them Renee's friends. I tell Renee to go to the lady's shop and talk to her, and to see if he was on their camera. If that was Joe, we are done. Mission accomplished. The suspense was unlike anything I'd ever felt in my life. I began pacing a trench into my front yard, waiting to hear back from Renee. Word got back to Ella's group fast, and they wanted to know now. I still hadn't heard back from Renee yet, so I remained silent. The comments were turning extremely toxic already, like they were disappointed in the ending. They wanted him to be dead. Rumors and accusations were being thrown around freely. This was not a movie. I had no time for this. I get a DM from Renee. She had just left the woman's shop and began explaining the situation to me. It was him. He was wearing the same clothes. I tell her, a lot of people have Raiders windbreakers and sweats. Did you see the tape? She tells me, no, I didn't have to. She described his tool bag perfectly. It's true. He just doesn't want to be with us anymore. This was a scenario I never even considered, to be honest. Who leaves their wife and 6 kids? She was convinced, though, and she was satisfied. It was Joe, and he chose to leave. My heart broke for Renee at that moment. I'm not ashamed to say I cried. I returned to the private chat with Ashley and Rachel. Our hearts completely shattered. This had consumed our lives for the last 6 to 7 days at least. It's honestly hard to even remember how long it had been. It seems like a lifetime ago. Rachel then informs us of what's going on back in Ella's true crime group. It's disgusting. They want to know now. They've been following this closely as well, but it seemed like entertainment to them, like a movie playing out in real time. I began looking through the comments and immediately became enraged. I made my last mistake here, and it was the nail in the coffin. I commented, "Can Renee get her head wrapped around this, please? It hasn't even been an hour and a half." I wanted to say more, but still had some control over my fingers. I sent a DM to Ella. I cannot remember exactly what I said, but it wasn't nice. She replied immediately, calling me self-righteous, and I blocked her. Maybe she's right, but at that time, my life was consumed with this. Ella did nothing constructive other than promote her own Facebook group. All she cared about was traffic on her page. It's the last contact we had. Her group was going crazy with accusations, and my comment did not help. It was around this time I heard from Renee again. "Someone sent me a picture. He's right around the corner." I try to calm her, but I do not hear back. I assume she's on her way to confront Joe. It was him, and I'm glad he wasn't dead, but that dude had some explaining to do. I waited as patiently as possible to hear back from Renee. I had to know what happened. "Scammer! She knew where he was the whole time. She's just trying to scam for money. He's been home this whole time." Just an example of what I was reading in Ella's group. Disgusted, I leave the group without saying a word. I was immediately blocked from the group. I've never smoked so many cigarettes in my entire life. When I hear back from Renee, all the pieces come together. Apparently, sometime during the last bender, Joe checked himself into rehab. I can't say exactly when. I honestly don't know. Him popping back up exactly 60 days after he disappeared does make sense. But what do I know? I know you do not need an ID to check yourself into rehab. HIPAA laws probably had something to do with it as well. Like I said, I'm just a guy that drives a tractor for a living. It almost explains why Joe was not on the NamUs site. I'm sure rehabilitation centers are checked before adding a person to that list. Police suspected he was a voluntary missing person the whole time. I just think they could have done a better job communicating that personally. I stopped asking tough personal questions once Joe came home. I know, this probably isn't the ending you've been looking for, but that's what happened. We were just Indiana Jones, and Nazis were going to open the Ark at the end, regardless of what we did. Our private chat was satisfied. Renee was satisfied. Her children were extremely happy to see their dad again. Renee told me they wouldn't leave his side, and did not want to go to sleep that night. I have a feeling it was okay to stay up a little late. Since Joe has come home, Renee has been harassed online every minute of every day. Ella has decided it's her life mission to make Renee's life a living hell. She's come after me a little bit, but nothing like what Renee is experiencing. She's posted everything, up to and including doctored photos and conversations to make them fit her narrative. An example? Nudes of Renee that aren't really nudes of Renee. Stuff Renee sent to her to try to get her off her back, to maybe earn her trust. She's doxed Renee. She wants the $1,200 from GoFundMe refunded. Renee and her family are dirt poor. That money is gone. Whatever Ella's goal is, what she is doing is victim blaming. Going as far as to connect CPS, trying to get Renee's children taken from her. Is Renee and Joe's relationship perfect? No. It's a Fresno love story, there's no doubt about it. But Renee hasn't even been able to enjoy having Joe back. Still, as I write this on January 29th, 2022, it is still happening. I'm not going to point anyone in the direction of Ella and her disgusting behavior. Rachel, Renee, myself, and many others have been spending our days reporting her, but she just moves platforms. This isn't the first time Ella has done this. She's a professional troll hiding behind a fake profile with a fake picture. It's why I haven't changed her name. Thank you for reading this. It's a story that needs to be told. I don't know how or when it's going to end. I haven't been paying attention to Ella since I started writing this 3 days ago. I just hope she's exposed. She would never do the things she's doing if her name and face weren't next to the crap she was saying and posting. She's a coward trying to go viral by ruining Renee and her family's life. She shouldn't be allowed to do it to Renee or whoever her next target will be. She's done this before. She will do it again.